much about Kavanaugh, but I'm skeptical because his name is Brett. That sounds less like a Supreme Court justice and more like a waiter at Ruby Tuesdays. Hey, everybody, I'm Brett. I'll be your Supreme Court justice tonight. Before you sit down, let me just clear away these rights for you.
Hi, I'm your host, Dan Barker, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist on Facebook Live. And of course, that was Stephen Colbert talking about Trump's nomination this week to the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, which is our topic today. If you have a question during the show, you can ask it here on Facebook, or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. I'm joined today by FFRF staff, Ryan Jane. Ryan Jane is a staff attorney at FFRF, and by FFRF's Director of Strategic Response, Andrew Seidel, both of whom researched the list of potential nominees, including Kavanaugh. I don't know any of you viewers noticed it, but Monday night, just 2 minutes after Trump announced Kavanaugh's name, FFRF emailed a press release, maybe some of you got it, about the 53-year-old Kavanaugh, detailing the very serious dangers of his nomination, but also offering some hope. What we can do, what you can do to keep such an ideologue off of our highest court. So, Andrew and Ryan, did you have to prepare like 3 different press releases to go out just so when the name was announced, then it could just go straight out again?
Yeah, we actually did. We had to prepare 4. We initially were going in with 3, and then over the weekend, Hardiman became kind of the second contender for the crown or for the rose that Trump was giving out. So we had to scramble and get him done on Sunday and Monday. So we actually had 4 different press releases drafted, edited, and ready to go.
Yeah, the only thing we would not have been prepared for would be the complete oddball Judge Judy nomination.
Wow. Well, we would have said something about it. But, so maybe, let's hope we don't need that research in the future for
Hopefully.
any of those. So Kavanaugh is, we're going to talk about Kavanaugh being a danger. And then at the end of the show, we're also going to offer some hope, what viewers can do. And both of you worked really hard on this whole process of researching the backgrounds of these potential nominees, including Kavanaugh. So either of you, what's dangerous about him?
I mean, there's a lot to be scared about with Kavanaugh. First, just in terms of his general overall outlook, he is going to be the second most conservative judge on this court. And we actually have a graphic from 538 that shows where on the spectrum he'll land, if Bruce can throw that up right there. You can see he's going to be more conservative than Alito and Gorsuch, and just shy of Thomas in terms of conservatism, that is very, very extreme, almost as extreme as you can get.
So what do you base that on? Why do you say?
Well, Bruce, if you can throw that back up one more time. This is actually, the Judicial Common Space score is actually, it's a group of academics who have gotten together and they try to study where judges fall on a left to right, liberal to conservative spectrum. And it's a pretty good indicator, and they update this every term as decisions are coming down.
And I've seen some debate about other metrics that are reasonable ways to measure the spectrum, and the consensus in any event seems to be that Kavanaugh is well on the more conservative side of Roberts.
And the extreme conservative side, yeah.
And so that's very concerning, because the idea that that our decision maker on the court used to be Kennedy, who was selectively standing up for civil rights, that world is gone if Kavanaugh ends up there. Now the decision maker is, however you look at it, most likely going to be John Roberts, and that's a terrifying prospect.
So, but Kennedy was or is not a liberal. I mean,
no.
If Kavanaugh's confirmed, wouldn't it still be a 5-4 conservative? But it would just be more conservative.
Well, you're replacing the swing vote on the court, or they're trying to replace the swing vote on the court with as far right a person as you can practically get. And that is one of the reasons he's very scary. But that's just the overall sort of where he lands on the judicial spectrum. When we're talking about issues that are important to FFRF, specifically state-church separation, we know that he is a very, very dangerous justice for us.
But during his nomination speech, he mentioned that he would be this open... let's look at one of the clips that he said during that night.
My judicial philosophy is straightforward. A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law. A judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition and precedent.
So that sounds kind of neutral and objective and fair, balanced, but when he talks about as written, isn't that originalism, Ryan? Isn't that doctrine of originalism?
Yeah, I mean so this is a line and a narrative that has been repeated by the conservative justices in the court for a long, long time, and it really gained steam with Antonin Scalia, who was kind of touted as this arch originalist. And so the way that this rhetoric has always been framed is the way that Kavanaugh said it, where it said this is the original textualist interpretation of exactly what the Constitution said, informed by history, what it meant at the time. So you consult old dictionaries and you say, we're going to just call balls and strikes, we're not making the law, we're not like those activist judges on the other side. But the thing that you have to understand, and I think it's important that people listening keep people honest. When someone tries to sell that idea to you, you need to tell them that they should take another look at that, because the reality is that entire narrative is just a lie. The judges who have described themselves that way are actually have a long, clear history of picking and choosing which rights they want to interpret that way and which ones they will find a way to say, oh, well, there's this history that I think changes the meaning in this way. So, I mean, just as a couple random examples, if you look at the Scalia and the Second Amendment, in the Heller decision, he looked at is there an individual right to own firearms? And that is most definitely not what the Second Amendment says, but he wanted to find that, so he looked at the Second Amendment very expansively, looking at history and everything, and said, well, in this case, we have this really expansive right. But then when a right comes that's hostile to him, something like same-sex marriage, for instance, then he looks at the text of the Constitution and says, I don't see any right to gay marriage here, so any honest textualist would have to shut this down. And we've seen Gorsuch try to apply this as well. And I forget which oral argument it was. Andrew, maybe you remember. There was an oral argument this year where Gorsuch was acting very, very smugly. He said, I'm going to bring up something that the other justices often forget, which is something called the Constitution. And then Ginsburg just smacked him down and basically just put him right in his place, basically saying there are plenty of rights that are not in the four corners of the Constitution that you don't want to lose.
Well, and I think you're right to say that the narrative of originalism is a lie. It's not true, but I also think even if you were to look at originalism as a judicial philosophy and give it in the kindest light, you'd have to say that it's intellectually bankrupt. I mean, this is a philosophy that says you look at what the words of the Constitution and only the words of the Constitution say. And there are some really terrible examples. I think it was Nina Totenberg once asked Scalia, so if you look at the Eighth Amendment, it says cruel and unusual punishment. And because it says and, Scalia says that if the punishment was cruel and usual, then it was perfectly acceptable. Huh. And he says that, therefore, I think Nina Totenberg said, so can we put people in the stocks? And he said, yeah, that's a perfectly legitimate way to punish people now. It's not what the founders actually intended, which is the hilarious thing about it. If you go read the Federalist Papers and read what Hamilton wrote, I think it was 79, number 79 of the Federalist Papers. If you read what he wrote about the judiciary, they very clearly intended there to be a lot of interpretation on the side of the courts, not just taking what the founders wrote individually. And if you look at the first 30 years of Supreme Court precedent, when the court was actually going, these were all founders at the time, all the founders were still alive. They did not do this originalist, ridiculous approach. It's a narrative meant to make judicial activism on the right seem not like activism. That's
like it's legitimate or something.
exactly.
It looks to me like the way originalists treat the Constitution is kind of how conservative Christians treat the Bible as their founding document. We look at the original words, we look at what Jesus said, and yet look at all the schisms.
Sure.
They read in what they want to see, you know, and you can, I've heard some theologians say that, well, Jesus was the original feminist, or he was the first socialist. And whatever you happen to be, you look at it and you see yourself, and isn't that what some of these guys are doing with our Constitution?
I mean, I think that's an excellent analogy. And, you know, this is, again, approaching Kavanaugh from the broad standpoint, but if you get down into the nuts and bolts of the decisions that he's made, they're really terrifying. You know, there was a line in that clip that immediately set alarm bells off for me, and that's when he talked about using tradition to make these decisions. Because when you're talking about state-church separation, tradition is one of the big arguments for upholding long-standing constitutional violations, including government prayer. And in Kavanaugh's words, he would have upheld, you know, prayers at the presidential inauguration and the addition of "So help me God" to the presidential oath, because it's been happening for a long time.
History makes bad law, somebody said.
And we always see that with our religious display cases, with things like Ten Commandments monuments. Their front-running argument is always, this has been here for 60 years and you're the first people to ever complain about it, and so how could this possibly be an endorsement of religion? Which is ridiculous, of course, because it was unconstitutional then, it's unconstitutional now. Just because you've been doing something illegal for a long time doesn't mean that it is somehow immune from the law, but that has been persuasive in some cases.
I mean, that outlook makes us prisoners of history. I mean, where would we be if we had to bow to historical and traditional violations of the Constitution? Think about slavery. Think about segregation. Think about the subjugation of women. We would be stuck in the past.
And women couldn't vote because none of the founders wanted women, at least as far as we know, none of them thought women should vote.
And that's one of the very scary things about Kavanaugh. This is not just an attempt by the right to sort of freeze American jurisprudence where it is. They're actually trying to roll back the clock with his appointment.
I wrote a song in about 20 years ago, The Battle of Church and State. If you call us and we put you on hold, you can hear that song at our office here. And one of the lines says, "Some say that the wall between church and state is just a bad metaphor. If unbelievers can't be protected from the rest, then what is the Bill of Rights for?" So that phrase, bad metaphor, you uncovered something about Kavanaugh and Rehnquist, dealing with the phrase wall of separation.
Yeah, so that line comes from, that you quoted in your song, comes from Justice Rehnquist attacking the wall of separation.
A former
the Chief Justice. Yeah, and Kavanaugh gave a speech last year at the American Enterprise Institute, which he quoted favorably Rehnquist attacking that wall of separation. And of course, it is a metaphor, and it's a great metaphor that Thomas Jefferson used to explain the First Amendment. He actually quoted the First Amendment and used that metaphor. And it does do a wonderful job. It's a nice shorthand for understanding the American government's relationship with religion and vice versa. So to be critical of that and explicitly critical of that is very alarming if you are a secularist or a fan of state-church separation. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Kavanaugh.
Well, it's a direct attack on our organization and what we are doing to protect that wall of separation.
Absolutely, and he's got even more direct attacks in his past as well.
So a lot of these conservatives talk about religious liberty, and I think Kavanaugh does too. And when you and I hear the phrase religious liberty, we think of this nice open country. But what do they actually mean when they use that phrase?
Yeah, now there is an attempt to redefine religious liberty. And the first thing you have to understand about religious liberty is that it cannot exist. The freedom of religion does not exist without a government that is free from religion. Having a secular government is a prerequisite for religious freedom. And what the religious right has been trying to do in the last 5-10 years is actually redefine that right, that personal religious freedom right, and morph it into this license to discriminate or into a legal exemption from, generally applicable laws.
Didn't Kavanaugh say something about the poor, beleaguered Christians are being attacked by these anti-religious bigots, and the Christians are the ones who are the true victims, and their religious liberty is being hampered here?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a throwback to if you know your history, pre-America in 18th century, in Europe, but also in the colonies, and you look at like Massachusetts, they had quote unquote religious liberty, but only if you're a Puritan, right? And so to them, it's prior to state church separation, prior to the First Amendment, this was the argument was that you have freedom to be a Christian. And they were trying to sell that idea, and then it was the founders who realized the fallacy in that, and so that's why it was so groundbreaking and revolutionary to have a governing document that actually says, no, we want religious liberty for everybody. And so, I mean, they're at least rolling back the clock 70 years or so to prior to the Supreme Court adopting or addressing these issues and incorporating the First Amendment to the states. But in a way, I mean, I think you could make an argument they want to roll the clock back centuries in some sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really the alarming thing about this attempt to redefine religious liberty. It's actually about making some people more equal than others, to borrow a phrase from Orwell. It's about creating a privileged class, believers in this case, specifically Christians as members of the majority religion, and everybody else would be this disfavored second class.
Well, Christians, but now especially Roman Catholics. How many Catholics are on the court? And Kavanaugh is a Roman Catholic himself. Look at what he said during his nomination acceptance.
I am part of the vibrant Catholic community in the D.C. area. The members of that community disagree about many things, but we are united by a commitment to serve.
So is there now a de facto religious test for the Supreme Court, that there has to be so many Catholics on the court?
It looks that way.
It does look a little like that. And this is actually, I wrote about this in the Think Progress article that we did yesterday. And it's almost like they're using Catholicism as a proxy for the way judges will decide on other issues. And it's kind of heresy in this country to say that religion would affect the way somebody governs or decides cases. But if you look at the way if you watched that ceremony, they talked about Catholicism constantly. He mentioned that his priest was there.
Yeah.
In the National Review online, or National Review's endorsement of him online, they highlighted his Catholicism. So if it's important for them to choose a Catholic, you have to assume that it's important for a reason.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot different from the years of Kennedy running.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and the counter argument is supposed to be that Sotomayor is one of the Catholics in the court, so obviously the religious identification doesn't place you on the far conservative end. But I mean, the fact of it is, with the exception of her, all the old white man Catholics are on the other end of the ideological spectrum. And the other thing is that it's just a fact that Catholics, for whatever reason, are just massively overrepresented on the Supreme Court. And so if this is supposed to be a reflection of American ideology and even the American judiciary, it's just such a far cry from that when you end up with a Supreme Court that is majority all from one perspective.
And it's important to note too that the Catholic overrepresentation started happening after Roe v. Wade in 1972. It came with Scalia, Thomas, and then it built from there. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Before Roe, you only had, I think there was a time when 2 Catholics were serving for a short overlap, but most of the time it was just one. It was actually known for a while as the Catholic seat on the court. So they expected kind of one Catholic on the court.
So how overrepresented are they now? Aren't Catholics about 20-some% of the population?
I think they're just over 20. I want to say 22% of the population, and they're 6 members of the Supreme Court now, or they theoretically will be.
And how many atheists are on the Supreme Court?
There's never been an open atheist on the Supreme
yeah,
Court.
So Andrew, you did some research on Kavanaugh flip-flopping with the phrase undue burden. This idea that the government should not place an undue burden on religious beliefs and practices. There can be some burdening, obviously, but
sure.
As undue. And you showed that a hypocrisy between how he treated the 17-year-old immigrant in Texas and between the Priest for Life group who had to post, what did they have to do, post a little disclaimer?
Yeah, this is really, I think, an interesting, it shows that Kavanaugh is driven by ideology and not law. So in 2017, there was a young immigrant girl, 17 years old. She came to the country illegally, found out she was pregnant, was trying to get an abortion, and the administration was doing everything they could to block her. The case reached Kavanaugh, and he eventually was overruled, but in his initial decision, he essentially would have forced her to carry this baby to term. Because he was trying to delay her ability to get an abortion until it would have been illegal for her to get an abortion in Texas. So essentially what he was doing was trying to force her to carry this baby to term. He said that that was not an undue burden on her ability to exercise her right to choose. Okay, so that was not an undue burden. 2 years before that, in the case Priests for Life, this was a Catholic group that was challenging the opt-out procedure for the Affordable Care Act's contraception mandate. So if you're a religious group, you can opt out of the contraceptive mandate, but there's a procedure for doing that. It's kind of like you have to opt out of the draft if you were a conscientious objector. They were challenging that procedure. And that procedure is filling out a form that is 5 blanks. You have to fill out your name, the name of the corporation or organization you represent, the address, contact information, date, sign. That's it. And that was according to Kavanaugh, a, quote, substantial burden on the organization's religion. So forcing a 17-year-old girl to carry a pregnancy to term is not an undue burden. Having to fill out a 5-page or 5 blank form is a substantial burden on religion. It is hypocrisy at the highest level.
And it further underscores how vacuous it is, this idea that these judges are just calling balls and strikes based on the definition of words. I mean, the reality is that there are always going to be squishy, flexible words like undue burden that they're going to interpret the way that they want to interpret. And it's not to be overly cynical, like all judges are ideologically bent, but this one very clearly is. And I know there are some senators like Sheldon Whitehouse, for instance, who are clearly fed up with this. And so when they are talking to nominees during their confirmation hearings, they're trying to get straighter answers out of them and saying, don't feed me that lie that you're just going to be dealing with cases as you see. Like, the reality is you're going to be changing the law one way or the other. What is your philosophy for approaching that? And I think that's a very fair question. It shouldn't be acceptable to just dodge that and say, no, I'm entirely impartial and I would never apply my own thoughts to this.
Well, they always say that, don't they? I'm just going to be objective. And we don't have to wonder about Kavanaugh, do we? We know what he thinks and what he said. When it comes to state-church separation, for example, the Santa Fe school district in Texas, that decision which outlawed school broadcasts of prayer, right? And what did he say about that, dealing with students' rights?
Sure. So this was a 2000 case that the Supreme Court decided. And in that case, they decided that school-organized, school-sponsored prayers, even if they were delivered by a student, over a public address system at a school event, such as a football game, were unconstitutional. It's a very well-reasoned and written decision. It was 6-3. Kennedy, who Kavanaugh is replacing, voted in the majority to strike down those prayers. Kavanaugh, at the time, was in private practice, and he actually wrote an amicus brief to the Supreme Court. And he wrote it for 2 U.S. representatives, both former football players. And in that brief, he made some very disturbing arguments. Probably the most disturbing was that he essentially, without saying it, he made it very clear that the court should strike down the Lemon test, which is this central support of the wall of separation between state and church. It is the test that all lower courts are supposed to apply when they are looking at whether or not a government action violates the separation of state and church. And he would get rid of that entirely, which is very, very alarming.
Yeah, and that goes back to 71. So I mean, that's talking about quite literally undoing 50 years of Supreme Court precedent on this issue, and the Lemon test has been the subject of jabs from conservative Supreme Court justices for a long time.
Scalia, Thomas.
So, yep, and so I think there's a very real concern that despite all they're talking about respecting longstanding precedent, that it could very realistically be on the chopping block if Kavanaugh gets on there.
And one other thing before we get to the next clip from that brief, if you read that brief, Kavanaugh talks extensively about advocates for separation of state and church. And the terms that he uses to do so are less than kind. They're pretty alarming, actually, if you do this kind of work. He talks about that we're trying to create an Orwellian world, that we're trying to cleanse the public square of religion, and he makes allusions to what we seek would make Christians lower than Nazis, and when you pair that with the language about cleansing, it gets a little...
And we're absolutists.
Absolutists.
Extremists.
Yeah, I mean, people really ought to go read the news release on this and see exactly the language and the phrases he used. We pulled them out, we highlighted them. I did the same thing in the Think Progress article. It's really worth understanding how he views groups like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United, and the ACLU that fight for the separation of state and church.
And didn't he mischaracterize the whole case in Santa Fe? This was about government speech, but he was saying that we were trying to ban student speech.
He said that it was about trying to ban student religious speech, and what it was really about was refusing to give a megaphone, essentially, to religious speech by students, which the government absolutely does not have to do and should not do at a school-sponsored event.
Yeah, if it had been student speech, if these were students just getting together to have a prayer circle and the school went in and said, hey, you're not allowed to do that, this is a public school, FFRF would have been on the students' side, saying this is not government speech, you can't go in and stop students from praying. But that is not what was going on here, but he wanted to twist the facts.
Yeah, and it's important to note, too, that in the history of that case, this was not... Well, the school had a very long history of trying to promote prayer and religion and impose it on other people's children.
And besides that, it wasn't us state church absolutists who were taking that case. It was a Mormon and a Catholic family who complained about the Southern Baptist prayers. So he totally misunderstood that whole.
Correct.
At the end of his nomination speech Monday night, he talked about how fair and balanced he would be.
Tomorrow, I begin meeting with members of the Senate, which plays an essential role in this process. I will tell each senator that I revere the Constitution. I believe that an independent judiciary is the crown jewel of our constitutional republic. If confirmed by the Senate, I will keep an open mind in every case, and I will always strive to preserve the Constitution of the United States and the American rule of law. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, there you go. He's a free thinker.
So would he keep an open mind, do you think?
Based on what we found and the research that we did, I think he's already made up his mind on a lot of issues, including reproductive rights, including the separation of state and church, and probably government regulation in general. This guy would strike down something called Chevron deference, and he's never met a government regulation that he didn't want to get rid of, which obviously protects us from a whole host of issues, from things like financial malfeasance to environmental degradation. So
yeah, I mean, of all the potential nominees who we researched, Kavanaugh had by far the most voluminous paper trail, and so there's far more than we could have possibly even gone through, and his record is just very, very clear. So the idea that he is going to stay open-minded, I mean, in some very nominal sense that might be true, where he's like, hey, if you can convince me that my entire life history I've been wrong about everything, then I'm all ears. But his track record is just crystal clear on all these different issues.
Yeah, and again, people really ought to go read the press release. We know we're just scratching the surface here. He defended a school choice program in Florida for Governor Jeb Bush that the Florida Supreme Court struck down. This was private religious school vouchers. He litigated the 2000 election for Bush down in Florida. Then he worked in the Bush White House after that. And talking about a paper trail, Politico just had a great article talking about his paper trail while he was at the White House. We're talking probably about maybe more than 1 million pages that are going to have to be released before he can be confirmed, including his work on the Starr Commission, investigating Vince Foster's death, all kinds of who knows what is out there.
So there's no mystery here, is there? I mean, just in spite of the rhetoric, we know what kind of a game is being played.
I mean, there could be a skeleton or two lying in those papers that.
But I mean, there's no mystery about what kind of candidate this person might be. Before we talk about what we can do and what our viewers can do about this, because there's a lot of things we can do, and so it's not just all doom and gloom. There's hope here. The other elephant in the room is his idea about prosecuting a sitting president. Isn't that a concern right now?
Yeah, even investigating, not just prosecuting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that he was on the Ken Starr team that investigated Bill Clinton in the 90s, and so he was on the head of that team and pushed Ken Starr to aggressively go after Bill Clinton during that investigation. But then when he was working in the White House under Bush, George W. Bush, he claims to have had a change of heart, where when he saw how difficult the job of the presidency was, he decided, you know, what we were doing was really wrong, and a president should be free to do whatever they want without having to worry about a cloud over their head for legal problems, which is just, to my mind, an absolutely absurd idea that the president should be literally above the law, to the point not only where you would have to impeach them before you prosecute them, because I mean that's a legitimate question, but I think it's beyond the pale to say that you can't even investigate whether they've committed a crime. I mean, if that's right, he's saying that the president can just start executing people in the Oval Office and you can't investigate that. You have to wait for his term to end, and then you can deal with it afterwards. And that's just, that has to be nonsense.
So that's a flip-flop. That's a hypocrisy in his
Well, I mean, yeah, he would argue that he's growing, but the real concern here too is not just that stance, but that the president right now is under a very productive investigation. It's produced 5 guilty pleas and it's got 22 indictments. And Kavanaugh publicly said the president should not be investigated. And then the president picked him to go onto the highest court in the land. That right there is very, very
It's
alarming.
just a coincidence, Andrew.
Right.
You know, that's just a coincidence.
I mean, it's an alarming coincidence.
You would hope that if he has...
You'd have to refuse.
Yeah, if he has a sense of ethics about this to any degree, he should be reassuring the senators that if anything relating to the Trump investigation comes before me, I'll recuse myself, because there's such an obvious appearance of partiality.
And that ought to come up in the confirmation hearings. And the judicial canon of ethics, which does not apply to the Supreme Court justices, does say that even the appearance of impropriety is a problem for justices, and they ought to be recusing themselves.
Okay, this might be unfair to say it because there should be no religious test for public office, but Kavanaugh is a member of one of the most unethical religious institutions on the planet, an illegal and corrupt institution, and he obeys them, and he has an allegiance to the Vatican and to the Pope. So what hope do we have for his high standard of ethics, do you think?
Well, what do you think?
So we do have a few questions. I think we're almost out of time. Shall we do questions first and then get to what you can do?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to just say that, I mean, I think hopefully people are scared right now. We didn't even really get into Roe versus Wade, which, I mean, I think Kavanaugh laid out a very clear plan to, if not overturn that decision and make it completely impotent. Again, in that same case that we were talking about with the 17-year-old immigrant. So I think people are probably a little afraid right now, and they should know that there is a path to stopping this nominee. There is a path to victory. It involves a lot of work on their part, but it can be done. Robert Bork was stopped. We actually here helped stop a couple of Trump's nominees already. Jeff Mateer. It can be done. It's the fight of the century, and you have to stand up, and you can't say, well, my voice doesn't matter. And we'll talk about exactly what you can do, I think, after the questions.
Well, why don't we do it right now? I can hold these. Annie Laurie, who couldn't be on the show today because her foot is still healing, she prepared a list of 4 things that you can do to fight this issue.
I mean, so the first one is register to vote, and I think that's really important. FFRF is actually working, our chapters this year are working to register voters. We're getting out the vote. That's something that's our chapters have just taken on along with the Secular Coalition for America. It's really, really important. And then also plan on how you're going to vote. Make a plan. I think that's important as well.
And then telling your friends and family. I mean, I think if this is an issue that has you fired up enough that you are going to take some action, it's also important enough for you to try to help inspire other people to take action. If they are saying the sort of talking points that we covered today, where they're saying, well, you know, it was a 5-member conservative court before, and it's still that, explain to them why that it's not as docile as they thought it was. This is actually much more concerning than it seems at first, and so inspire them to to take some action as well.
Well, as the old song says, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And now that's going to be gone. The third one is find a town hall in your community to personally show up to let people know how you feel and focus on state church, but also on women's rights. And
the last one is call your senators, and this is probably the most crucial. And I've heard people say, well, you know, I live in a completely red state and I know which way my senators are going to go. That is not an appropriate response to being asked to call your senators. They have to hear from you. And your phone calls do make a difference and they do matter. You may not swing that senator's vote, but those senators talk to other senators who may be in a less red state. And it has worked before. I mean, including during this administration. I mean, look at the vote for the ACA, that late night vote where McCain, you know, famously did the thumbs down and everybody gasped. You standing up and calling your senators and getting in touch with your elected representatives can make a big difference. And if you didn't already do that for this Supreme Court nominee, you should. And if you are on FFRF's action alert list, you would have already known about this on Monday night. If you are not on that list, you should text FFRF to 52886. If you have done that already, you immediately got an alert on what you could do to stop this nominee right on Monday night. I think that went out 4 minutes after the nominee was announced. But text FFRF to 52886 and you'll be signed up. All you have to do is put in your information, and this is a really easy system for you to get in touch with your senators via Twitter, Facebook, email, and calling. We highly, highly recommend it.
And if you know people who care about this stuff but don't know how to take action, tell them to do the same thing. Just text FFRF to 52886, and then we will send them messages where it's just push this button on your phone, and we'll do most of the work for you.
Yeah.
so maybe one or two questions here before we're out of time. Sonia, how do you say it, Emmerling? She wants to know if there are any state church cases in the pipeline that might be affected by this nomination. What's an example?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, any state church case in the federal courts could go up. Right now, we have one in the Ninth Circuit, which involves prayer at school board meetings. This is the Chino Valley case. The school board there was reading the Bible, proselytizing from their dais, and praying at their school board meetings. It was more like a church service than a school board meeting. That is before the Ninth Circuit right now. We expect a decision on it any day.
We're winning right now.
We won at the lower court level. We expect a favorable decision, but you can only prognosticate so much. And this school board has been essentially captured by a local megachurch. And every step along the way, they could have gotten out of this case very easily. They've chosen to fight. And I would expect them to appeal this to the Supreme Court, especially with a switch coming up.
And Barker versus Conroy might get there.
I mean, literally any one of the cases we have in the federal pipeline could go there. Our Morris County case. Yeah,
so that was a state law case in state court, and we got a unanimous 9-0 win. If anyone who follows
at the New Jersey Supreme Court.
At the New Jersey Supreme Court. So anyone who follows FFRF News knows that was our last kind of really big litigation victory, and the county has announced that they're going to ask the Supreme Court to look at that and requesting that they broaden the free exercise clause and the Trinity Lutheran decision to apply to this very different set of circumstances. And while that would be, I think, shockingly unusual for a unanimous state Supreme Court case to be taken, and for a number of other reasons, it would be really unusual. If the court gets transformed, I mean, who knows?
And I will say this, after Gorsuch took his seat on the court, we saw the religious right, the anti-FFRF groups, Liberty Council, Liberty Institute, Becket Fund, they were emboldened by that change, and they've been taking worse and worse cases on because they think they can win them at some point. So yes, call your senators. Text FFRF to 52886. Do it.
So here's a question from Teresa Fox. I don't know if this question is facetious or not. Are we being too alarmist here? No. I think it's a good pick. I don't think we atheists have too much to worry about a guy who will uphold the Constitution. Roe v. Wade will never be overturned. Isn't there a legal firewall? Isn't that precedent so established that we non-believers have that protection right now?
No, I mean, no. I mean, there's nothing stopping 5 justices on the Supreme Court from overturning Roe v. Wade. I think it's probably more likely that they gut it and make it, in their eyes, harmless. Basically, take all the power out of it. But there is nothing that does not stop these justices. They can do what they want.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the scariest things about Kavanaugh, and this puts him in the ranks with, Roberts and Alito especially, come to mind, that he's very smart, he's very smooth, and so he is more than capable of finding a way to technically maintain precedent, but just eviscerate it at the same time and completely rewrite the rules.
Yeah, and if you want more information on that, Mark Joseph Stern at Slate just wrote a great article basically explaining the roadmap for what will happen to Roe in Kavanaugh's brain and how he wrote that out in previous cases.
So here's a ball game question. I don't know if we can answer this, but what's the chance of him getting enough votes to be confirmed? Or should we push to wait until after the election?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little too early to tell what his chances are, especially, historically. So, for instance, with Gorsuch, the government released 140,000 documents that were tied to his government service. Same thing happened with Kagan. 170,000 documents came out. Jeff Sessions wanted more of her documents when he was on the Judiciary Committee. By some accounts, Kavanaugh's got more than 1 million documents out there, and we don't know what's in them. I mean, this was the time of invading Iraq, the time of the torture memos, which he's denied being involved in. All kinds of stuff was happening, and there could be a bomb in there. So there's a lot that could change between now and when he has his confirmation hearing. I think the last time the last rumor I heard was that they were shooting for a September 21st date. So that's quick, but there's a lot that can happen between now and then, especially if people get on the phones and show up at town hall meetings. Yeah,
but with that many documents, I mean, besides the so-called McConnell rule that just with an election coming right up, people ought to be heard, ought to have the chance to...
The American people ought to have a voice.
Right. So in addition to that, with this level of documents, like 10 times the number of documents of these previous candidates, you would think, the previous nominees, you would think that there would be, you just need more time to look through all those documents and to scrutinize them correctly. So I mean, that's another reason that trying to ram this through that quickly is just unreasonable. For all we know, if they rush him through and get him confirmed, it might come to light afterwards that, oh, he actually has this thing that shows that this is a major problem and everybody would have voted against him if they only had seen this before.
So let's wait and let's not pray about it. We'll just watch
and see. Don't pray, act.
Ask.
No, don't watch and see, act. It's time to get on the phone. It's time to show up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Andrew.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Ryan, both attorneys here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Very smart, very busy attorneys. And thank you for watching Ask an Atheist, FFRF's Ask an Atheist on Facebook Live. You can check out our other weekly TV show. It's called Free Thought Matters. Go to our website to find that, as well as our weekly News Bites on FFRF's YouTube channel. And don't forget about our convention coming up in San Francisco in November, the first weekend of November. The speakers include Salman Rushdie, the former director of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards, Mythbusters host Adam Savage, the actor John Delancey, he used to act in Star Trek, ex-Muslims of North America co-founder Sarah Hayter, the stand-up comedian Leanne Lord, very, very funny lady, and in fact, that's her web address, very funny lady, and the very irreverent actress and Saturday Night Live alum Julia Sweeney. And also appearing will be Ensaf Haidar, the activist wife of a Saudi freethinker whose persecution and imprisonment have caused global outrage. You can register for our convention online today at ffrf.org/outreach/convention. And if you want to receive FFRF text alerts on your smartphone, text FFRF to 52886. Data rates might apply. Again, you can send a text that says FFRF to 52886. So we'll see you again next week for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.